What if the greatest treasure in a millionaire's mansion wasn't his gold, his cars, or his empire, but the voice of the woman scrubbing his floors? One ordinary afternoon, a man worth millions walked through his doors early and discovered a secret that would change both of their lives forever. Stay with me, because this is a story you will never forget. Welcome to BrainFuel, the place where real, powerful stories come to life. Stories that inspire, stories that touch the heart, and stories that remind us that miracles can happen anywhere. If you believe in second chances, in hope, and in dreams that never die, then make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our family today. Your support means the world, and it helps us bring you more stories just like this one. It was one of those rare days when fate decided to twist the usual routine. Jonathan Reed, a man whose name was whispered in boardrooms and admired in business magazines, was not supposed to be home. His calendar was packed months in advance, filled with meetings, contracts, and trips across the globe. He was the type of man who lived more in hotel rooms than in his own mansion. To his staff, his return was like the rising of the sun after a long storm, unexpected, yet dazzling. That morning, Jonathan's private jet had landed earlier than expected. A deal overseas had wrapped up faster than planned. And for once, Jonathan decided not to extend his stay. "I'll go home," he told his assistant. "It's been too long since I've slept in my own bed." The chauffeur dropped him off at the mansion's gates. The estate, spread across rolling green lawns and shaded by oak trees older than the city itself, seemed unusually quiet. Even the fountains in the garden whispered more softly than usual. Jonathan took a deep breath. Despite his wealth, his heart longed for something money couldn't buy. Peace, comfort, maybe even surprise. He stepped inside. The familiar scent of polished wood and fresh flowers greeted him. Usually, the house at this hour was silent. The staff followed their routines with military precision, cleaning, cooking, preparing for an owner who barely noticed their presence. Jonathan had always seen the mansion as too big, too empty, a cage of luxury. But that day, as his leather shoes tapped against the marble floor, he stopped. His ears caught something. At first, he thought it was the faint hum of a radio. But no, this sound was richer, deeper, alive. It was singing. Jonathan frowned. Singing? In his house? None of his staff had ever dared to make noise. He moved carefully, curiosity pulling him forward like an invisible hand. The voice grew clearer with each step. It wasn't just sound, it was soul. The notes flowed like water over stones, rising and falling with raw emotion. Jonathan felt his chest tighten. He had sat through concerts with the finest opera singers, flown friends to private performances by celebrities. But this was different. He followed the sound to the long hallway, past the grand dining room, until he reached the heart of the mansion. The living room, a vast space with high ceilings, golden curtains, and a piano that had been untouched for years. And there, standing with her back to him, was Grace. Grace, the maid. She wore her simple uniform, her hair tied back as always, a cleaning rag still in her hand. But in that moment, she wasn't cleaning. She wasn't dusting the chandelier or scrubbing the marble table. She was standing in the middle of the room, eyes closed, pouring her heart into song. Jonathan froze. Her voice wrapped around the room like sunlight slipping through stained glass, warm, bright, yet filled with shadows of pain. It was a gospel-like sound, full of faith and struggle, every note carrying weight. Jonathan leaned against the doorway, unable to move. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. Grace, the woman who had worked in his house for years, the one who quietly dusted shelves and polished silverware, had a voice that could silence the world. His mind raced. How had he never noticed? How had she hidden this? Grace sang a verse, her voice trembling at first, then soaring higher. She wasn't just singing words. She was telling a story of survival, of dreams lost and found, of battles fought silently in the shadows of wealth she didn't own. Jonathan's heart pounded. For the first time in years, he felt something stirred deep inside him. He had built empires, bought companies, and expanded wealth beyond imagination. But this voice, this unexpected discovery, shook him more than any million-dollar deal. Suddenly, Grace turned, spinning around as if sensing she was no longer alone. Her eyes widened in shock. She nearly dropped the rag. "Mr. Reed," she gasped, her voice breaking, not in song, but in pure embarrassment. I didn't know you were home. I'm so sorry, sir, I shouldn't." But Jonathan raised a hand, silencing her. For a long moment, he couldn't speak. He was still caught between disbelief and awe. The silence was heavy, filled only by the echo of her last note lingering in the air. Finally, he managed to whisper, "Grace, where did you learn to sing like that?" Her face flushed. She looked down, fidgeting with a rag in her hand. "It's nothing, sir. Just an old habit. I sing when I clean sometimes. I shouldn't have." But Jonathan interrupted, his voice firmer this time. "No, don't call that nothing. That was extraordinary." Grace shook her head. "I'm just a maid, sir. Nobody wants to hear me." But Jonathan couldn't agree. He knew, deep inside, he had stumbled upon something priceless, something that money couldn't measure, but the world desperately needed to hear. That day, in his grand mansion, Jonathan Reed realized that sometimes life's greatest surprises don't come from contracts or deals or riches. They come when you least expect them, in the voice of someone you thought you knew but never truly saw. And as he stood there, listening to Grace's soft breathing after her song, he understood. His life had just changed forever. Jonathan Reed had listened to countless voices in his lifetime. Business partners negotiating over billions, lawyers crafting persuasive arguments, celebrities at charity galas trying to impress him with their charm. He thought he had heard it all. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared him for the sound echoing through his mansion that afternoon. It wasn't polished like the pop stars he occasionally invited to his parties. It wasn't even carefully trained like the professional opera singers who had performed at events he sponsored. No, this voice was raw. It was unfiltered. It was the kind of voice that carried both pain and beauty at the same time, the kind that reached straight into your soul before your mind even had time to make sense of it. Jonathan leaned against the golden frame of the doorway, his expensive watch gleaming under the chandelier, but he hardly noticed. His entire focus was on the woman standing in the middle of the living room. Grace. She wasn't supposed to be singing. She wasn't supposed to be seen at all. For years, she had been like the quiet background music of the mansion. Always present, always reliable, yet never noticed. She wore her uniform neatly pressed, kept her eyes down when speaking, and moved like a shadow across the vast halls of wealth. But right now, she wasn't a maid. She wasn't a shadow. She was a star. Her voice rose higher, weaving through the air like silk threads, wrapping themselves around Jonathan's chest. He felt his throat tighten. Something inside him, something buried beneath years of business deals, contracts, and endless work, stirred. He noticed the small details he had never cared about before. The way her fingers trembled slightly, as if each note carried a lifetime of memories. The way her eyes were closed, shutting out the world, as though she was back in a safer place, singing for herself and no one else. The way her whole body leaned into the sound, as though her heart itself was trying to escape to the melody. Jonathan thought back to his own childhood, raised in privilege, yes, but also in silence. His father had been a cold man, teaching him to value money above emotion. Feelings don't build empires, his father used to say. Numbers do. And so Jonathan had grown up burying his feelings, turning them into ambition, into control, into success. But this voice, Grace's voice, was breaking through the walls his father had built around him. He found himself holding his breath as she reached the peak of the song, her voice trembling with so much intensity that goosebumps ran across his arms. The words themselves were simple, just fragments of an old gospel tune, but the emotion in them made them feel like prophecy. Then, suddenly, Grace stopped. She opened her eyes, realizing she wasn't alone. Her body stiffened. The rag in her hand nearly slipped to the floor. Color drained from her face as her gaze met Jonathan's. "Mr. Reed," she gasped, her voice no longer powerful but small, fragile, embarrassed. I didn't know you were home. Forgive me, sir. I was just—" Her words trailed off, swallowed by shame. Jonathan stood frozen for a moment, struggling to form a sentence. He wasn't used to being surprised. In business, surprises meant risk, and risk was something he always controlled. But this wasn't business. This was something else. Something he couldn't measure with profit or loss. Finally, he spoke, his voice lower than usual. "Grace, where did you learn to sing like that?" Grace's eyes widened, and she shook her head quickly. "It's nothing, sir. Just an old habit. I sometimes sing when I clean. It helps me pass the time. I didn't mean for you to hear me." But Jonathan didn't move. He studied her carefully. He had been surrounded by liars, pretenders, people who wore masks to climb social ladders. But Grace, she wasn't pretending. He could see it in her trembling hands, in the way she avoided his eyes, in the flush rising in her cheeks. "That wasn't nothing," Jonathan said firmly, his tone sharper now. "That was remarkable, extraordinary. I've heard professional singers who couldn't move me the way you just did." Grace shook her head again, her lips pressing into a thin line. "With respect, sir, you're exaggerating. I'm just a maid. Nobody cares about my voice." Her words struck Jonathan harder than he expected. Just a maid. How many times had he himself thought of her that way? Just another staff member. Just another person in the background. Just another pair of hands keeping his luxurious world spotless. But today, standing in front of her, he realized how blind he had been. "Grace," he said, softening his voice, "you have a gift the world needs to hear." Her eyes glistened, but she quickly looked away. "I had dreams once," she whispered, almost to herself. "When I was younger, I thought I could be somebody. I sang in church choirs, at community gatherings. People told me I had talent. But life had other plans. Bills to pay, family to support. Dreams don't feed empty stomachs." Jonathan's chest tightened again. He had lived in a world where dreams were easy to chase because money was never a problem. But here was Grace, a woman who had been forced to bury her gift under the weight of survival. And yet, even buried, that gift had not died. It was alive, breathing, waiting for someone to listen. Jonathan realized something profound in that moment. Money could buy luxury, but it couldn't buy soul. Grace had something he couldn't purchase, something no billionaire could own, the power to touch hearts. And as he stood there, staring at the woman he thought he knew, he understood that this moment was not an accident. It was destiny. Grace stood frozen, her hands twisting the rag she had been holding, her voice trembling as though she had been caught committing a crime. But it wasn't a crime. It was something far more vulnerable, a dream she thought she had buried long ago. Jonathan, still reeling from the power of her singing, took a slow step forward. His polished shoes echoed against the marble, and Grace flinched slightly at the sound. It was almost as if she expected to be scolded, perhaps even punished, for daring to sing in the halls of her employer's mansion. But Jonathan's voice was soft, almost pleading. "Grace, please, tell me, where'd you learn to sing like that?" She looked down, unable to meet his eyes. "It's just something I've always done. Nothing serious." "Don't call it nothing," Jonathan said firmly, his eyes narrowing. "That wasn't just singing. That was truth." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. The weight of the words hung heavy in the golden room. Finally, Grace exhaled shakily, as if releasing years of secrets all at once. "I wasn't always like this," she whispered. "Quiet, invisible. I used to be full of life. I used to believe I could be someone." Jonathan remained still, listening more intently than he had listened to anyone in years. Grace's eyes grew distant, her voice softening as memories resurfaced. "I grew up in a little neighborhood on the south side of the city. We didn't have much. My mama worked 2 jobs, cleaning houses during the day, cooking in a diner at night. My daddy, well, he left when I was just a girl. It was just Mama, me, and my younger brother." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "We didn't have money for toys or fancy clothes, but we had church. Every Sunday, Mama dragged us there, no matter how tired she was. And that's where I first sang. The choir director, Miss Louise, she heard me humming one day and told me I had a gift. She put me in the children's choir, then the adult choir by the time I was 12. Her voice quivered as she continued. "People used to tell me I could make it big, that my voice could take me places. I remember once, after service, a woman grabbed my hand and said, "Child, your voice heals hearts." And for a while, I believed her. I thought, maybe, just maybe, I could be someone more than a girl from the poor neighborhood. Jonathan's chest tightened. He could almost see her as a young girl, standing in a small church with stained glass windows, her voice rising above the congregation, lifting people out of their troubles for a few precious moments. "But life has a way of humbling you," Grace said, her smile fading. "When I was 16, Mama got sick, real sick. She couldn't work anymore, and bills started piling up. My brother was too young to help, so it fell on me. I dropped out of school, took whatever jobs I could, waitressing, cleaning, babysitting. Singing didn't pay rent. Singing didn't buy medicine, so I gave it up." She swallowed hard, blinking rapidly to keep the tears at bay. "I told myself it was just a silly dream, that people like me don't get discovered. That's for people with money, people with connections, people who live in a world I'll never touch." So I silenced myself. I stopped singing in front of people. The only time I let out was when I was alone or when I was cleaning, because somehow the songs made the work feel lighter. Jonathan could feel the weight of every word. His empire had been built on privilege, opportunity, and doors that always opened for him. For Grace, every door had been slammed shut before she even reached it. Her voice cracked as she finished. "And now here I am, 38 years old, working as a maid in your house, singing songs to empty walls. That's all that's left of my dream." The room fell silent again. Jonathan felt a lump rise in his throat, something he hadn't felt in years. He saw not just a maid standing before him, but a woman who had sacrificed everything for her family, who had carried burdens heavier than gold, a woman who had given up her own future to ensure someone else's survival. He realized why her voice had moved him so deeply. It wasn't just talent, it was the story behind it, the pain, the resilience, the faith that had been poured into every note. Grace's singing wasn't just sound. It was a reflection of a lifetime of struggle and endurance. Jonathan finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "Grace, you've carried a gift inside you all these years. Even when the world tried to silence you, your voice still survived. Do you know how powerful that is?" Grace shook her head, a tear slipping down her cheek. "It doesn't matter anymore. The world isn't looking for women like me. They want someone young, pretty, polished. Not a tired maid with calloused hands and second-hand shoes." Jonathan stepped closer, his eyes locked on hers. "You're wrong. What the world needs is authenticity, realness, and that's exactly what you have. Grace, when you sang just now, I didn't hear a maid. I heard an artist. I heard a woman who has something to say, and the world would listen if you gave them the chance." Grace's lips trembled, as if she wanted to believe him but was afraid to. She had spent so many years shrinking herself, convincing herself she was ordinary, that the thought of being extraordinary seemed dangerous. But Jonathan's words planted a seed, one that stirred the dream she thought had died. And though she didn't know it yet, this moment would change everything. Jonathan Reed wasn't a man who hesitated. In business, he was known for making bold decisions, buying companies in a single meeting, signing million-dollar contracts with nothing but a handshake. But this decision, the one he was about to make, felt different. It wasn't about money or profit. It was about something priceless, something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. He looked at Grace, still clutching the rag in her trembling hands, her eyes full of doubt. For the first time in his life, Jonathan saw someone who had a treasure the world didn't know existed. And he knew in that moment that he couldn't let her gift stay hidden. "Grace," he said slowly, his voice steady, "the world needs to hear you." Her head shook instantly, almost violently. "No, sir. Please, don't say that. I can't." "You can," Jonathan interrupted, his tone firm but not unkind. "What I heard today was not just singing. It was truth. It was life. Grace, do you have any idea what that voice of yours could mean to people out there? To the ones who feel invisible, forgotten, broken? You could give them hope." Grace let out a bitter laugh, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Hope doesn't pay bills, Mr. Reed. Hope doesn't buy groceries. I've lived my whole life learning that dreams don't keep the lights on. Jonathan's jaw tightened. He respected her honesty, but he couldn't let her sink back into silence. And what if I told you that I'll take care of the bills? What if I told you I'll handle the groceries, the rent, the medicine, whatever you need, while you take the chance you deserve? Would you still tell me no? Her breath caught. She stared at him, searching his face for any sign that he was joking. But Jonathan's eyes were serious, determined. "Why would you do that?" she whispered. "Why would a man like you care about a maid like me?" Jonathan paused, the weight of her words hitting him like a stone. A maid like me. How many people had dismissed her, overlooked her, categorized her by her job instead of her soul? He didn't want to be one of them. Not anymore. Because, he said, his voice lowering, I've spent my whole life chasing money, power, success. And, do you know what? None of it ever moved me the way your voice did. For the first time in years, I felt human. I can't ignore that, Grace. And neither should you. Grace's lips trembled. She wanted to believe him, but fear clung to her like chains. Even if I tried, I wouldn't know where to start. I've never been in a studio. I don't know about microphones or producers or any of that. You're not just anything, Jonathan cut in, and you don't need to know. I'll handle everything. I'll make the calls, set the meetings. All you have to do is sing. For a long time, Grace said nothing. She looked away, her mind racing with memories of lost opportunities, broken promises, and the heavy responsibility she had carried for her family. Part of her heart ached to say yes, but another part was terrified. What if she failed? What if she embarrassed herself? What if the world laughed instead of listened? Jonathan sensed her hesitation. He softened his voice, stepping closer. Grace, do you remember what you told me? That people once said your voice healed hearts? I believe that. I believe you were given this gift for a reason. Don't let fear bury it forever. Please just give yourself one chance. Her eyes finally met his, shimmering with tears. She didn't answer right away, but deep down, something inside her shifted. For years, she'd been carrying everyone else's burdens, forgetting she once had a dream of her own. And now, someone was offering her a chance to reclaim it. A week later, Jonathan made good on his promise. He drove Grace to a professional recording studio, a sleek building with glass walls and buzzing energy. Grace sat in the passenger seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her heart racing. She fell out of place in her plain dress and worn shoes, surrounded by polished cars and stylish strangers. When they stepped inside, the receptionist's eyes widened at Jonathan Reed's arrival. "Mr. Reed," she said warmly, "we weren't expecting you today." "I'm here with someone special," Jonathan replied, placing a reassuring hand on Grace's shoulder. "She's the one you should be paying attention to." Grace swallowed hard, her stomach twisting with nerves. Every step through the studio halls felt heavier than the last. She wanted to turn back, to run, to hide. But Jonathan's steady presence beside her kept her moving. The producers were waiting in the control room. They were young, confident, and curious, but when they heard why Jonathan had brought her, they exchanged skeptical glances. A maid-turned-singer? It sounded more like a charity project than a serious talent. But Jonathan ignored their doubt. He led Grace into the recording booth, the microphone standing tall before her. The glass walls separated her from producers, their eyes watching closely. Grace's palms were sweaty. She leaned toward the microphone, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know if I can do this." Jonathan's voice came gently through the speaker. "You don't need to know. Just sing the way you did in the living room." She closed her eyes. For a moment, fear threatened to suffocate her. But then, she remembered the church, her mother's tired smile, the people who once told her she could heal hearts. She took a deep breath, and then she sang. The first note filled the booth, then the control room, then the entire studio. The producer's skeptical expressions melted into astonishment. They leaned forward, mouths slightly open, as her voice soared higher and higher. Every lyric carried weight. Every note trembled with life. Every sound told a story of hardship and resilience. When she finished, silence blanketed the room. Then one of the producers whispered, "My God, where has she been all this time?" Jonathan smiled, pride swelling in his chest. He already knew the answer, hidden, unseen, unheard. But not anymore. That day marked the beginning of something neither of them could have imagined. The recording from that day spread faster than anyone expected. At first, it was just a test track, one song sung straight from Grace's heart. But Jonathan, with his vast network, knew exactly who to send it to. Within a week, the song was uploaded online. Within 2 weeks, it had reached thousands. And by the end of the month, millions of people were listening to the voice of a woman they had never heard of, but somehow felt like they had known all their lives. The comments poured in. "This voice feels like medicine to my soul. She sings like she's lived 1,000 lives. How did the world miss someone this extraordinary for so long?" Grace sat in Jonathan's study one evening, staring at the glowing laptop screen, unable to believe the tidal wave of love pouring in from strangers around the world. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through the comments. They really like me?" she whispered, almost in disbelief. Jonathan, seated across from her, leaned back with a small smile. "Grace, they don't just like you. They're hungry for you. Your voice isn't just beautiful, it's real. That's what people are craving. You're giving them something money can't buy." But with the growing attention came new challenges. Invitations began flooding in, from local radio stations, small concert halls, even television shows. At first, Grace hesitated. She wasn't used to being the center of attention. For years, she had lived in the background, unseen, her voice hidden away. "Mr. Reed," she confessed one night, "I'm not sure I belong on a stage. What if I mess up? What if they laugh at me? I've never been trained. I don't even know how to act in front of a crowd." Jonathan leaned forward, his eyes firm but kind. "Grace, do you remember why you started singing in the first place?" She thought back to the little church, to her mother's weary smile, to the people who once told her she carried hope in her voice. Slowly, she nodded. "Then hold on to that," Jonathan said. "You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be honest. Sing the way you've always sung, like it's your lifeline. The rest will follow." And so, Grace stepped onto her first stage. It was a modest concert hall, filled with a few hundred people who had come out of curiosity after hearing her online. She stood in the spotlight, her knees shaking, her hands clammy. For a moment, she thought she wouldn't be able to do it. But then she spotted Jonathan in the front row, his steady gaze grounding her. She closed her eyes, took a breath, and began to sing. The room fell into silence. Every note poured from her like confession, weaving through the audience, wrapping around them like a warm embrace. Some closed their eyes. Some wept quietly. Others clutched their chests as if her voice had touched something hidden deep within them. When she finished, the hall erupted in applause. The sound thundered through her bones, shaking her in a way she had never experienced. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just Grace the maid. She was Grace, the singer, the artist, the woman who had something to give to the world. From that night forward, everything changed. Bigger stages followed. Interviews on national television. Articles in major newspapers. She was invited to perform at charity galas, where she used to serve drinks, and at theaters where she once cleaned floors. Everywhere she went, people wanted to hear the story of the maid with the golden voice. But through it all, Grace remained humble. She didn't trade her humility for fame. When fans asked about her journey, she spoke openly about her struggles, her sacrifices, and the years she had spent in silence. "I'm proof," she would say, "that it's never too late to dream again." Jonathan often found himself in the wings of her performances, watching with quiet pride. He had closed countless deals in his lifetime, but this was the one that mattered most. Not because it made him richer, but because it made him feel alive. He had discovered something priceless in his own home, something he couldn't buy or control, something that reminded him what it meant to be human. One evening, after a particularly moving performance where Grace brought an entire audience to their feet, she found Jonathan waiting backstage. Her eyes sparkled with both joy and disbelief. "Can you believe this?" she whispered, shaking her head. "Me standing here? People clapping for me?" Jonathan smiled. Yes, Grace, I can believe it. Because from the moment I heard you sing, I knew the world was waiting for you. They just didn't know it yet. Grace's lips trembled into a smile, tears threatening to fall. I almost gave up on myself, she admitted. But you didn't. You saw something in me when I couldn't see it in myself. Jonathan placed a hand on her shoulder. Sometimes, Grace, all it takes is one person to remind us of who we really are. The roar of the crowd still echoed behind them. But in that quiet moment, it was just the two of them. Two lives forever changed by a single unexpected afternoon in a golden mansion. And as Grace continued to rise, inspiring millions with her voice and her story, she never forgot where it all began. Not on a grand stage, not in a studio, but in the quiet of her employer's living room when she thought no one was listening. Because sometimes destiny whispers when you least expect it. And if you're lucky, someone is there to hear it.